Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the soft, damp earth of ancient Tenochtitlán as the warm air buzzes with the scent of copal resin, fermented maguey, and a faint whiff of sweat and storytelling. You're standing beside a still lake, the great temple pyramids towering above, their stone surfaces glowing orange in the last light of day. All around you, soft flute notes float like dragonflies. Something is about to happen, something sacred, strange, and just a little bit scandalous. You probably won't survive this as a modern guest. Between the strict etiquette, the deeply spiritual sensuality, and the surprise appearances of naked dancers wearing bird masks, you might find yourself politely escorted out for asking too many questions. But tonight, you're not a tourist. You're a silent observer, unnoticed by the feathered priests or the giggling girls with obsidian mirrors. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere quiet and cozy, let me know your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're at the edge of a temple courtyard now, where torchlight flickers against carved stone. The crowd is hushed, save for the soft rustle of cotton cloaks and the rhythmic patter of bare feet on the stairs. A line of women moves gracefully past you. Some are flower vendors, others priestesses, their faces painted with ochre and ash. Each carries a small offering, a bowl of cacao, a stalk of maize, or a bundle of fragrant herbs tied with a red string. Tonight, they are preparing for one of the lesser-known but deeply important rituals dedicated to Xochiquetzal, goddess of love, beauty, and, well, let's say she wouldn't be out of place on a spicy soap opera. This isn't a loud ritual. It's not the kind of thing that makes it into textbooks full of wars and empire building. This is the ceremony of quiet longing, of offering sweetness and scent, of love songs whispered between sips of poke. Poke, thick, white, slightly sour, is the drink of the gods and of in-laws. It's fermented from agave and drunk during festivals, fertility rites, and long discussions about your cousin's questionable marriage choices. You sip it slowly now, from a clay cup offered by a boy no older than 10. Don't ask him too many questions. He's in training. The priests emerge. They're adorned with quetzal feathers and jaguar pelts, but under the masks, they're serious men with calloused feet and strict interpretations of what counts as symbolic. One carries a flute carved with scenes of lovers entwined in a flower bed. Another has what appears to be a very large, very delicate fan made entirely of butterfly wings. Why? No one knows, but it flutters dramatically in the torchlight. As the ritual begins, the air thickens with the scent of burning copal. The women step forward one by one, placing their offerings on a low altar of smooth black stone. A priest sings, not in words you recognize, but in a slow, lilting chant that circles your spine like warm water. You realize the song is about longing, but not necessarily the physical kind. It's about hunger, for rain, for harvest, for peace, for warmth in the dark months. But also, yes, for the kind of companionship that keeps you from talking to your cactus during long, dry seasons. Here's where things take a turn: the erotic poems. These were real. Scholars preserved fragments in Nahuatl, and while many were destroyed after the Spanish arrived, a few were smuggled into missionary writings, ironically by monks who couldn't stop blushing. The poems describe blooming bodies, fruit-like hips, and kisses that taste like agave honey. You hear one now, recited softly by an old man with trembling hands. The crowd nods along, appreciative but reserved. It's not crude, it's sacred. And there she is, Xochiquetzal herself. Well, a teenage girl painted head to toe in marigold and dressed in layers of flower petal fabric. She glides across the courtyard, her movements rehearsed but graceful, like the petals of a jacaranda opening. She pauses in front of the altar, kneels, and opens her hands. Inside is a hummingbird, not alive, but freshly prepared and beautiful, its iridescent feathers catching the firelight. It symbolizes joy, speed, and intimacy, and maybe a little caffeine dependency if you were to read too much into it. This is the moment that historians still argue over. Was this a metaphor? A fertility signal? A silent invitation? No one agrees. Some suggest the hummingbird was symbolic of male vitality. Others say it represented the fleeting nature of desire. and a few quietly whisper that the ritual used to involve live birds until the goddess allegedly complained. You're pulled deeper into the sensory spiral: music, smoke, flowers, the gentle sigh of wind over the lake. Everything feels wrapped in velvet. The ceremony winds down, and the crowd slowly disperses. No loud declarations, no fireworks, just a lingering sense that something important happened. Like the first time someone holds your hand for too long and you pretend not to notice. As you head toward the temple's rear courtyard, a young man hands you a small bundle wrapped in woven fiber. Inside is an amulet made from jade, bone, and is that a baby squirrel tail? Yes, yes it is. This, he says, will help you dream of your future partner. You politely thank him, despite not being entirely sure which end of the amulet should face the moon. You find a quiet step and sit down. Behind you, the priests chant their final words, thanking the goddess for her attention and asking that she forgive any accidental impoliteness, like that one guy who brought dried fish instead of chocolate. He's going to have weird dreams tonight. And so the first night ends, but the journey has just begun. You stretch your legs, already a little dizzy from the poke and overwhelmed by the sights, scents, and whispered metaphors that make up the secret language of Aztec intimacy. There's more to see tomorrow, and trust me, things are about to get more complicated. You wake before dawn, curled in a nest of woven mats, your head still a little foggy from the poke and perhaps from dreams shaped by that squirrel-tailed amulet. Somewhere in the near distance, water slaps gently against the canoe dock. You stretch, toes brushing the cool stone, and rise into the quiet air of early Tenochtitlán. Today, your guide, a woman named Melina with eyes like storm clouds and an intimidating knowledge of gossip, offers to show you something most outsiders never see. She tells you without much preamble, it's hard being sacred and sexy. You'll see. She's talking about the maidens of the Kamakak, the religious schools where future priests and priestesses were trained in everything from astronomy to anatomy, though the curriculum leaned much heavier toward ritual purity than, say, practical dating advice. You follow her through a narrow canal-side path flanked by flowering bushes and giant maguey plants. She stops in front of a modest-looking structure with walls of white stucco and a roof thick with drying maize. From within, soft humming drifts out, female voices in a rhythm so soothing it could put a jaguar to sleep. Inside, you find a room full of girls, all in their early teens, kneeling and grinding corn. Their hair is neatly braided, their cotton tunics simple and unadorned. A stern-looking older woman oversees the operation, though you get the distinct feeling that she would rather be anywhere else. These are the ones chosen for the goddess, Melina whispers. The chosen ones. They are referred to in Nahuatl as Ahualtepetl, a poetic compound word meaning something like mountain of dew. The metaphor is delicate, but the expectations are not. These young women are expected to remain ritually pure, untouched by desire, temptation, or even overly dramatic poetry. A single misstep, and by out, we mean probably sacrificed, or married off to someone with bad breath and political connections. This is where the contradictions of Aztec society start to press in. On the one hand, fertility and erotic power are deeply sacred forces, celebrated, revered, even divinely honored. On the other hand, controlling that power was an obsession. Virginity was a cosmic commodity. It wasn't just about the body, it was about balance. Too much unregulated passion, and the gods got cranky. Too little, and the rain might stop. One of the girls, you later learn her name is Tecuichpo, glances up as you watch. There's nothing shy in her gaze. She knows what's expected of her, and she's not entirely buying it. You learn later that she's written love verses on a mate bark and hidden them behind a loose stone in the outer wall. It's said she dreams of being a priestess, but also of running away to sell flowers near the market where the dancers perform. She hums ballads under her breath, the kind that make censors twitch. Historians still argue whether these virginal vows were truly enforced or more performative, whether these girls were sincerely kept from all knowledge of desire, or simply instructed to act like they didn't know better. Michel Foucault once posited that repression itself was a form of sexual architecture, that by creating spaces of silence, cultures also create spaces where power can twist quietly into obsession. You're drawn to a small side room where a robe hangs from a wooden peg. It's made of woven rabbit fur and decorated with snail shells. This was ritual sleepwear, used during ceremonies of symbolic marriage between priestesses and gods, unions that took place entirely in dreams, or so they claimed. Melina tells you a story she's not supposed to tell, about a girl chosen to be the bride of Tenochtitlán, the goddess of nourishment and fertility. During the ritual, she was to fast, meditate, and spend 3 nights alone in the flower house, a small, incense-filled chamber lit only by the stars. On the 2nd night, she snuck out and met a boy from the Weavers' Guild. They kissed under the moon, traded amulets, and promised to meet again. When she returned, the dream had changed. The priest interpreted her sweat and shaking as divine possession. She was elevated, revered. No one ever knew the truth, except perhaps Tenochtitlán, who sent an unusually bountiful harvest that year. Interpret that how you will. As you step back out into the courtyard, the sun now higher and harsher, you hear the sound of bells. A group of boys training for future priesthood march past in perfect rhythm, their eyes straight ahead. Among them is a boy with a crooked smile who glances sideways at the girls inside. He hums the same melody you heard earlier. One of the girls turns ever so slightly. This moment, a glance, a tune, an invisible thread, is how desire lives in a society determined to control it. Quiet, careful, coded, like pressing a love note between the pages of a prayer book. Before you leave, you're handed a prayer bundle, corn silk, a jade bead, and something that smells faintly of cinnamon bark. It's for guidance, they say, or maybe for discretion. Hard to tell. As you walk away, Melina asks if you noticed the wall carvings just outside the school's gate. You hadn't. She gestures. There in the weathered stone are faint etchings, a moon, a flower, a snake curling around a heart. She grins. Officially, it's about transformation, she says. Unofficially, it's the oldest love triangle in town. You chuckle, but a breeze passes by and makes the carvings seem to shimmer. Maybe the gods really did walk here once, or maybe they still do, pausing now and then to read a scribbled love poem left behind by someone who was supposed to be pure but couldn't quite forget they were human. The heat today feels thick enough to chew, and your sandals stick slightly to the sun-baked path as you follow Melina up the stone stairs of yet another temple. This one built for gods who, to put it mildly, had demanding tastes. Tenochtitlán, Tenochtitlán. The names roll like thunder through the archives of Aztec mythology, each deity a complex cocktail of fear, desire, morality, and frequently unapologetic weirdness. But tonight's ritual isn't about poetry or innocence. It's about surrender. You're headed into the domain of Tlazolteotl, the so-called filth eater. Yes, that's what her name loosely translates to. And no, it's not an insult. She's the goddess of purification, lust, confession, and the kind of sins that leave you blushing just thinking about them. At the temple's summit, you find a narrow chamber carved with swirling vines and ecstatic faces. There's incense again, always incense, and this time a curious basket filled with objects both symbolic and interpretively shaped. You glance away before your brain begins any comparisons. The central priest is dressed in black cotton, his face painted half white, half soot. Beside him stands a girl wearing a shawl embroidered with red lips and maize stalks. She is tonight's offering, not in the human sacrifice sense, but in the deeply metaphysical one. She has been chosen to play the role of a confessor, absorbing the spoken sins of others through ritual, eye contact, and symbolic gestures that toe the line between performance and intimacy. You take a seat, legs folded, as people approach the confessors. They kneel, speak softly, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a giggle, and place one hand gently on the confessor's knee. No words are written down, nothing is recorded, but everything matters. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were literal absolutions or more like psychodramas, ritualized therapy with a theological twist. Peter Webb, in The Erotic Spirit Through History, suggests that this ritual likely involved a kind of symbolic flirtation between guilt and grace, with the body acting as the stage. One older man approaches the confessor and murmurs a confession that causes the priest's painted brow to lift slightly. Something about a stolen kiss, a forbidden blanket sharing, and a very confusing incident with a festival mask. The confessor places a flower behind his ear, offers a reed soaked in pulque, and gestures toward the temple's lower garden. He leaves lighter, smiling. Melina whispers, "He'll fast tomorrow." Then he's free. You ask her if everyone gets forgiven. She shrugs. Tlazoltla always forgives. It's her job. But sometimes she sends dreams later, strong ones. At this moment, another girl, barely more than a teenager, kneels beside the confessor. She's shaking. You lean forward instinctively and then realize she's confessing desire. Not action, not sin, just the ache, the wanting. Her voice trembles through the chamber, and even the priest stills his pacing. The confessor listens, eyes half-lidded, then reaches into the basket and offers her a necklace strung with dried marigolds and cacao beans. The girl ties it around her own neck and exhales, visibly relieved. You sense that in this ritual, even unacted longing can be heavy. You remember Foucault's idea that sexuality is not just about acts, but systems of surveillance, internalized rules, whispered codes. In Aztec life, it wasn't simply whether you did something, but how you thought about it, how it was framed within the grand cosmic balance. Even the most fleeting attraction could have metaphysical weight. One of the fringe stories from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings floats to mind, about a Spanish friar who, upon witnessing a similar ritual, wrote furiously in his journal about lust disguised as devotion. He never mentioned that he kept attending them. For research. But not all is heavy tonight. There's laughter too. A woman confesses to fantasizing about a market vendor who sells only chilies. He never wears sandals, she says, and he always gives me the hottest ones. Her confessor covers her mouth to stifle a giggle, then draws a heart in ash on the woman's palm. And now a ritual you weren't expecting begins. The priest approaches a small stone basin and adds handfuls of wildflowers, crushed maize, and something that looks suspiciously like rabbit fur. He pours water over it all and stirs until a faint steam rises. One by one, participants come forward, dipping their fingers and touching the liquid to their temples. It's called Nepantla, the ritual of liminal balance. The idea is simple. To live is to wobble between sacred and profane, between hunger and healing, between a glance too long and a prayer too short. You're handed a flower. Melina says you must press it to your lips and whisper a truth, not a grand one, just something unspoken. You hesitate, then lean in. No one hears it but the wind. As the ceremony closes, the confessors exchange garlands. The priest murmurs something too low to hear and lets the smoke drift upward. For a moment, the night feels elastic, stretched between what is and what might have been. You leave quietly, the scent of burnt maize clinging to your clothes, the sound of softly whispered truths echoing in your ears. You think about all the things you've never said, about the strange comfort in being seen, not judged. Outside the temple, a stray dog trots past with a flower garland in its mouth. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play again. You don't know if you believe in confession, but tonight, you understand why someone might. By the time you reach the lakeside courtyard again, the stars have begun to yawn across the sky. The full moon hangs like a polished pearl, casting silver onto the canals and flagstones, while dragonflies zip past your head with the urgency of late-night gossips. Tonight, Melina leads you down a path lit by small fire bowls, each cradled in a blooming clay flower. The air smells like marigold, roasted cacao, and something spicy sweet that makes your nose tingle, probably a ceremonial blend of chili dust and cinnamon. You're not sure if it's meant to bless or seduce. You're headed toward what locals whisperingly call La Danza de las Máscaras, the dance of masks. You've heard about it in fragments, a secretive rite performed only under certain moons, celebrating fertility, anonymity, and the idea that sometimes the gods only visit when no one is quite sure who's who. You pass through a long cloth veil and into a circular courtyard framed by tall stone walls. Within it, music, laughter, and movement. Dozens of masked dancers whirl across the stone floor, their bodies draped in sheer flower-dyed fabrics. The masks are unlike anything you've seen, some carved like owls, others shaped like jaguars or frogs with jeweled tongues. One man wears a turtle mask so wide he can barely turn his head. Here, identity is irrelevant. What matters is rhythm, scent, eye contact, and how you move. The legend goes, in the time before cities, the gods would descend from the stars to mingle among mortals, but they feared the power of names and faces. So humans began to wear masks during sacred dances, hoping the gods would feel safe enough to join. You notice two dancers, one in a hummingbird mask, the other in a gold-dusted skull, circling each other slowly, never touching. Their steps are choreographed like foreplay. Forward, back, turn, retreat, approach again. Then they break and disappear into the crowd. Were they strangers? Were they lovers? You'll never know. This is the strange duality of the Aztec erotic. It was never fully about the act. It was about the charge, the potential, the spark that dances just out of reach, forever suspended in moonlight. And now, the whispering begins. Around the edges of the circle, attendants pass among the watchers with baskets of flower petals soaked in fragrant oil. You're handed one, soft and pink, possibly hibiscus, and told to place it over your heart. Not on your clothes, mind you. Over your heart, skin to petal. You obey, feeling the coolness of the oil soak gently into your chest. Then the confessions begin, not in words, but in gestures. Dancers select each other, hands briefly touching fingertips. If both consent, they retreat into the shadowed arches surrounding the courtyard to perform what scholars often euphemistically describe as flower exchanges. No one speaks. The masks remain on. Names are left at the door like sandals. Historians still argue whether these masked dances were literal rituals of coupling or highly symbolic metaphors for celestial union. The Spanish chroniclers who described them were notoriously scandalized. One wrote that the devil surely ran the orchestra. Others suggest these events were more about spiritual blending, theatricality, and letting the community engage in what Michel Foucault would call structured transgression. Sin, but make it sacred. You find a quiet bench. A masked dancer in a deer mask sits beside you, breathing gently through the carved nose holes. Neither of you speaks. They press a flower petal into your palm, give a small bow, and vanish into the swaying crowd. Peter Webb once noted in The Erotic Spirit Through History that civilizations often encode their deepest truths not in laws, but in their festivals. Here, the Aztecs allowed a space where hierarchy, fear, and daily identity slipped away. In the mask, you could be a priest, a farmer, a widow, a warrior, or none of those things. You could be just breath, heat, movements, and the hope that someone might choose you. You notice one masked pair performing a different dance, slower, more intimate. Their hands do touch, but only at the wrists and elbows. It looks choreographed, but improvised at the same time. You learn later that this was a specific form of dance, a courtship originally meant for noblewomen and astrologers. Its name translates roughly to waiting for the moon to answer. Poetic and wildly impractical, but then again, so is most love. And yes, someone stumbles. A young man in a jaguar mask spins too quickly and knocks over a fire bowl. He freezes, mortified. A woman in a monkey mask laughs, picks up the bowl and balances it on her head while dancing away. Crisis averted, pride slightly bruised. Toward the end of the night, the music shifts. Flutes give way to slow drum beats and a hush settles. A single dancer emerges, masked, robed, moving with dreamlike slowness. Their mask is featureless, painted with a thin silver line for a mouth. This, Melina whispers, is Ilhuicatl in Ehecatl, the breath between stars, a spirit said to bless lovers with truth and protect them from envy. Everyone stops to watch. The dancer twirls, stretches, folds in half, then rises with arms wide. It's not a performance, it's a benediction. You feel it in your chest, like the beat of a pulse you forgot was yours. As the final drum sounds, the dancers freeze. A moment of stillness holds the space like a held breath. Then they bow, touch the earth, and vanish behind the curtains like smoke. You leave quietly. The oil from the flower petal still lingers on your skin. The moon is higher now, round and knowing. Somewhere, a flute resumes, less a performance, more a lullaby. You don't speak as you walk the canal's edge, you don't need to. Some nights, it seems, are not meant for understanding, only for feeling and remembering, softly, silently, like the trace of a mask pressed against your cheek. By now, you're beginning to understand something essential about the Aztecs. They didn't divide life into neat little boxes. Sex wasn't shoved into the bedroom. Religion didn't stay in the temple. Politics waltzed through your dinner. And if you drank too much poke and accidentally kissed someone under the maize drying racks, well, there was probably a law about that. This morning, you're nursing a light poke headache while crouched under a maguey plant. You may or may not have tried to dance last night with someone wearing a coyote mask. Hard to say. The music was hypnotic, the air was thick with wildflower oil, and someone handed you something labeled only 3 sips. You had 5. Melina finds you and hands you a gourd of cool maize water. You looked like a startled turkey last night, she says sweetly. Let's talk about public decency. She isn't joking. You're about to discover one of the lesser-known obsessions of Aztec society, regulating pleasure. While they celebrated fertility with full moon dances and sensual poetry, they also had an elaborate legal system for when, how, and if you could express those feelings in public. You walk with her to the Tenochtitlan court, where ball games were played, and more importantly today, where civil penalties were sometimes handed out. There's a man being fined for excessive neck touching. You blink. That's a crime? Apparently yes, especially if done outside of sanctioned festivals or without the approval of a marriage elder. See, while Aztec society revered sexual energy as sacred, it wasn't a free-for-all. Pulque, the sacred drink of gods and uncles at weddings, was heavily regulated. Getting drunk wasn't just frowned upon, it could be punishable by death, especially for the young or the unmarried. Even minor flirtation while drunk could get you exiled, or worse, made to wear cactus thorns as jewelry. Fashion, but make it penitential. You pass a mural showing two lovers beneath a blooming tree. They're mid-embrace, but there's a serpent between them, symbolizing temptation, or maybe just the judgmental neighborhood auntie. Beneath it, a caption, "The tree blooms, but the law sees." Poetic, vaguely threatening. There's a story Melina tells you about a nobleman's daughter who snuck out during the festival of Xilonen, goddess of young maize. She was seen kissing a young warrior behind a chili stall. The warrior was demoted. The girl was sent to serve a year in the House of Silence, a quiet, cloistered chamber where she was expected to reflect and grind maize at 3 a.m. as penance. Harsh? Maybe. But she emerged with arms like tree trunks and a talent for sarcasm. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced or if they functioned more like deterrents. Social traffic cones designed to keep things moving at a pace the priests could manage. Michel Foucault might suggest it was another example of desire being structured through visibility. The more rules you made about it, the more you proved it was worth regulating. And then there's the Pulque protocol. During certain festivals, it was permitted, encouraged even, for adults to indulge in pulque to honor the gods of harvest, rain, and fertility. But you had to follow specific rules. 1 cup, honorable. 2, respectful. 3, playful. 4, risky. 5, you were asking to wake up with your head shaved and a warning tattooed on your arm. It wasn't just about how much you drank, but how you behaved afterward. If you danced too boldly, made overt suggestions, or sang any verses with too many metaphors involving gourds, you could be fined a cloak. And cloaks were expensive. One fringe tidbit Melina shares, laughing behind her hand, is about an older woman who made a fortune selling decency fans. These were feathered fans embroidered with innocent scenes, ducks, maize, polite clouds, which ladies could snap open dramatically if a conversation veered into steamy territory. They became popular among priests who wanted to maintain an air of purity at social functions. You're told one bishop accidentally used his fan during a sermon and caused a 15-minute delay. But for all their rules, the Aztecs understood nuance. A couple could request a permission blessing from a priestess before a festival. This allowed them to be more expressive, within reason. There were even tokens given, jade beads or painted shells that signaled allowed affection. Think of it as divine PDA licensing. You pass a garden now where young men and women sit beneath broadleaf trees, talking softly, keeping at least 2 hand widths of distance between them. A priestess watches from a shaded bench, eating a tamale. Her glance is stern but patient. She's seen it all before. There's a man nearby, sitting cross-legged, weaving a poem into a fan. Literally, he's writing verses about longing and restraint, threading the characters in dyed cotton. He explains that the fan will be given to his beloved, but only if she replies with her own verse. This is slow flirting, Aztec style. You take a moment to reflect on your own culture. Texts, emojis, dubious typos. There's something oddly beautiful about needing to earn a smile. As the afternoon sun dips toward golden, you wander through a street where older women are selling small bundles wrapped in banana leaves. Inside, herbs said to cool the blood, a euphemism for calming desire. They're popular among scholars and married men on long work trips. Before you return home, Melina stops you. Here, she says, pressing a folded scrap into your hand. Just don't open it until you're alone. That night, curled under your woven blanket, you open the note. It's a drawing, a flower, half open, beneath it a single line of Nahuatl poetry. You don't need to translate it. You feel the meaning bloom behind your eyes. Desire here is not denied. It's guided, held, taught to grow in season. It's just before dawn when Melina leads you around the back of a quiet temple through an arch woven with marigolds and morning mist. The world is hushed. Even the birds seem to know that this place asks for reverence. Here, behind the bustle of the central plazas and public rituals, lies the sacred domain of the priestesses, the women who didn't just worship the gods, they prepared them, at least symbolically. You step into a stone corridor lit by small flame bowls. The air is thick with the scent of crushed flowers and copal. There are voices ahead, low, melodic, repeating the same chant over and over in a language so old even the priests don't translate it anymore. The walls are painted with delicate images of blooming vines, birth, and serpents curled around open hearts. All of it very tasteful, mostly. This is where the Cihuatl, the female priests, live and work, and unlike their more visible male counterparts, these women rarely appear at public ceremonies. But without them, none of it happens. The offerings remain unblessed. The symbols lie meaningless. The rituals stall. You enter a circular chamber where 6 women sit on mats, grinding seeds into paste with practiced meditative movements. One stirs a thick mixture of honey, cacao, and flower dust. Another folds cloths embroidered with stars. In the center is a stone figure of Xochiquetzal, the goddess of fertility and desire, her eyes inlaid with obsidian chips that glimmer in the firelight. Melina gestures for you to sit. No one speaks right away. They are preparing something important, a sacred union ceremony. Not a marriage exactly. Think of it as a rehearsal for divine harmony, a joining of opposites, spirit and body, order and impulse. It's symbolic, except when it isn't. You glance around at the tools they use, carved jade rollers for applying flower oils, obsidian blades for precision work, what kind of work they don't say, and what looks suspiciously like a ceremonial bath mat embroidered with what can only be described as cosmic anatomy. One of the elder priestesses finally speaks. Her name is Citlalin, and her voice sounds like wind through dry reeds. We shape the ritual, she says. We make the body ready. We speak to the gods through gesture. Sometimes they answer. You don't ask how. She picks up a small clay bowl and dabs a thin, shimmering paste onto the back of her hand. Then she turns to you. Flower of the moon, she murmurs. Rub it onto your wrists. It opens the dream channels. You obey. The scent is soft and complex. Jasmine, vanilla, something spicy underneath like crushed pepper. Your pulse slows. Your mind doesn't wander exactly. It meanders. This mixture, Melina whispers later, is one of many sacred ointments used to anoint ritual participants. Some for clarity, some for fertility, some for dreams. Others, allegedly, for attracting the attention of deities during particularly quiet calendar months. You watch as a younger priestess prepares a robe from woven fibers dyed blue with crushed insects. She decorates it with painted symbols, the 5 directions, the 4 rains, the open hand. This robe will be worn by the woman chosen to represent the goddess in tonight's sacred union. The man, her counterpart, is selected from among the temple's flower warriors. Handsome, devout, and extensively trained not to faint during ceremonial symbolism. He will wear the jaguar pelt and the moonshell necklace. They won't speak. They will perform gestures learned over years. Hands gliding over air, knees bending in reverence. A dance with no music. A kiss not given but implied. Historians still argue whether this ritual, known as Inquenin Yolilisli, or the way of being alive, ever involved physical intimacy. Some say it was purely symbolic. Others believe that, at specific festivals, the priestess and the warrior enacted a divine union in full view of the stars and a very silent audience. One friar recorded such an event with the breathless scandal of a man writing under candlelight while glancing nervously at the door. He described movements most unnatural and flowers placed in places unmentionable. He was later reassigned to a quieter post where the most scandalous activity involved bread shortages. Citlalin begins painting her palms with red clay. This is the blood of the flower, she says, not blood from a wound, blood from opening. She presses her palms to the stone floor, leaving prints that form part of the ritual space. These prints will guide the participants' steps like a silent map of intention. And now, the fringe detail: ceremonial whispering. At certain stages of preparation, the priestess must whisper the names of the gods into a shell, never aloud, always into the spiral. Then the shell is buried beneath the ceremonial platform. This is said to keep the gods anchored so they do not rise too soon or leave too quickly. It's part theology, part logistics. No one wants divine interruptions before the incense is properly layered. You're handed a piece of sweetened maize cake shaped like a lotus. It's meant to ground you after smelling the flower oil. You chew slowly, watching as two acolytes carry in the sacred instruments: a pair of fans, a single feather, and a mirror polished to a shine so perfect you can see your future doubts reflected in it. By now, your sense of time has melted. It might be late morning, it might be just past midnight, but you're aware, deeply aware, that this ceremony, for all its pageantry, is not a performance. It's a conversation with nature, with memory, with something old and half asleep that occasionally stirs in the smoke of anointing oil. As you leave the chamber, your palms are coated in a faint golden shimmer, a parting gift. You don't know if it means anything, but your hands feel warm all the way back to your little sleeping mat, and your dreams that night are filled with laughter, vines, and something just beyond your reach, humming softly in the dark. You wake to drums. Not war drums. Those are heavier, sharper, and tend to make you want to hide under things. But deep, echoing temple drums that roll through your chest like the soft growl of a jaguar waiting to stretch. Melina meets you at the canal's edge with 2 tamales and no explanation. You eat one before realizing it's filled with roasted squash and what might be toasted ants. It's protein, she says. You'll need it. Today, she says, you're going to witness something that no foreigner, then or now, was ever meant to see. This one is for the gods alone, she adds, and sometimes for the very brave. You try not to read into that. You're led past the outer courtyards into the heart of the temple complex to a chamber most locals only whisper about. The teocalli, or god house, isn't large or ornate. It's shadowed, quiet, and smells of charred herbs and old stone. In the center is an altar, low and smooth, with carvings that look more abstract the longer you stare at them. It's here that the high priest prepares the volunteer. Yes, the volunteer. This person, usually a young man selected through ritual dreams and omen readings, will spend a full cycle embodying a god, living as one, eating like one, walking among people, receiving offerings, and at the end, offering himself in return. You swallow your last bite of tamale slowly. Today, the god is Xipe Totec, the flayed one. Not the most romantic sounding deity, but crucial to the Aztecs. He represents rebirth, transformation, and the shedding of old skin, both literal and symbolic. To unite with this god is to embrace change. Painful, yes, but essential. The chosen one is led into the chamber. He wears a cloak made of feathers and bells, his body already marked with red and yellow paint. A priestess anoints his face with liquid from crushed marigold and pomegranate. The scent is sharp, like sunlight and sour memory. You expect solemnity. Instead, there's a strange joy in the air. This isn't a death march. It's a celebration of intimacy between man and cosmos, flesh and flame. Over the next few hours, the volunteer will undergo a series of gestures, symbolic acts meant to prepare him for the union. He'll dance. He'll sing verses handed down for generations. He'll be adorned with garlands made by women who fasted for 3 days to weave the right kind of thread. You watch, seated in the shadows, as the high priest performs a blessing not with chants, but with touch, drawing circles on the volunteer's back, brushing his shoulders with a bundle of reeds, and finally pressing an obsidian mirror to his forehead. Then comes the part that still baffles scholars. A young woman steps forward, veiled and silent, her face hidden beneath a hood of woven stars. She is not named. She doesn't speak. Her job is to enact what the Aztecs called nemalisli in netamamacalisli, life through shared essence. It's often mistranslated as ritual sex, but the term is broader, more esoteric. It involves no actual coupling, at least not publicly. Instead, she circles the volunteer, mirroring his every movement. When he raises his hand, she does too. When he kneels, she mirrors from the opposite side. Together, they form a moving prayer, 2 bodies in balance, in orbit, enacting union without contact. Peter Webb would call this erotic symbolism at its most refined, a gesture of tension, not release. Michel Foucault might murmur about coded performance and the power of restraint. Eleanor Herman would probably raise one eyebrow and say, but was there a tent somewhere after? Historians still debate whether private union followed. There are vague Spanish accounts, wide-eyed and unreliable, of couples disappearing after such rituals and returning, changed, glowing, or weeping, or humming tunes no one could quite recognize. What is certain is this: the body was not merely a vessel, it was an altar, a text, a message from the divine sent back to the divine. And in that moment, this young man isn't just pretending to be a god, he is the god. And then the final act. The priest offers him a bundle: maize, cacao, feathers, and a sharp sliver of obsidian. The volunteer cuts his palm just slightly and presses it to the altar. Not dramatic, not bloody, just enough. Enough to say, I was here, I opened. You feel the room shift. A breeze, impossibly cold, rushes through the sealed space. The priestess steps back. The drums fall silent, and the volunteer laughs. It's not mad or nervous. It's a laugh of release, of something lifting. The kind of laugh that comes when you say the thing you've been carrying for years and someone finally hears you. As the chamber empties, you find yourself outside again, blinking in the daylight. Melina offers you a small round fruit. You bite in. It's tart, sticky, sweet like endings. You ask if that ritual happens often. She shrugs. Not anymore, she says. Now the gods visit in dreams. Fewer logistics, less laundry. Still, you can't help but wonder, in a world where so much intimacy is hidden, what would it feel like to be touched by something sacred, not just in body, but in meaning? You don't answer, but later that night when you close your eyes, you find yourself dancing in slow motion with someone you can't name. The stars blink approval, and the altar, it's warm. The next morning, Melina greets you with a fan made of turkey feathers and a smirk that immediately makes you suspicious. She's sipping something suspiciously thick from a clay cup and waves you over before you even have a chance to yawn properly. Today, she announces, you're going to learn how to flirt without getting executed. It's not exactly the pep talk you expected. Flirting in this city, she continues, leading you down a bustling causeway lined with vendors. Postlight is like playing patoli with obsidian chips. One wrong move and someone's losing a finger, or a title, or an entire marriage. You're headed into one of the noble quarters of Tenochtitlán, where everything is dusted in luxury and danger. Flower markets bloom under canopies of woven reeds, water sellers sing through flutes, and young nobles pretend not to be watching each other over pomegranates. But they're watching, very much watching. You pause to admire a woman standing beside a stall of chili peppers. She's maybe in her mid-20s, dressed in layers of embroidered cotton and fanning herself ever so slowly with a fan shaped like a hummingbird's wing. She's not just cooling off, she's signaling. Melina nudges you. She's waiting for someone, or not. That's part of the game. You squint. A game? Oh yes. Aztec flirtation is a sport, with rules and feathers. Turns out, flirting in this society, especially for the noble classes, was governed by a strange mix of poetry, coded gestures, and very strict legal frameworks. You weren't just allowed to approach anyone you liked. Families arranged marriages, and love was a delicate matter wrapped in ritual, symbolism, and snacks. Let's start with the feathers. Aztecs believed feathers carried symbolic meaning depending on the bird and the context. A quetzal feather, long, iridescent, and impossibly rare, meant serious intentions. It said, I dream of you under moonlight and also want 10 children. A hummingbird feather, by contrast, whispered, I'd like to know what your voice sounds like when you're not talking about weather. Owl feathers? Risky. They could mean mystery or mischief, or nighttime regrets. It depended heavily on delivery method. And then there were the fans. Fans were everywhere, especially among noblewomen, and weren't just for dramatic exits. A certain fan movement, open snap close, could mean I see you. A slow wave with the left hand said I am recently unattached. Dropping the fan altogether, a silent scream for help, or flirtation, sometimes both. Melina tells you about a noblewoman named Yalatzin, sharp mind, excellent embroidery, terrible at subtlety. She fell in love with a weaver's son who played the reed flute like it was a love letter. Their courtship began with a shared bowl of pulque and evolved into elaborate fan exchanges across temple festivals. One fan was embroidered with verses, another was scented with crushed marigold. When her father found out, he tried to marry her to a tax collector with suspicious sideburns. She refused. The boy was sent to a monastery. Yalautsen, in protest, embroidered an entire tunic with lines of love poetry and wore it under her formal garments every festival for a year. It's now preserved in a museum, next to a stern note from a very unimpressed priest. Historians still argue over how much freedom noblewomen really had in romantic matters. Some evidence points to strict surveillance, arranged marriages, and swift punishment for stepping outside one's caste or duties. But other stories, love poems, coded songs, painted murals, suggest a world where desire slipped through the cracks like candlelight through fingers. Always hidden, but always burning. You sit near a courtyard fountain and watch a group of noble girls practicing their posture while balancing fruit bowls on their heads. Nearby, a group of young men pretend not to look. One drops a tiny painted stone near a girl's path. She picks it up, smiles faintly, and continues walking. A small interaction, but likely the beginning of something. "You see that?" Melina says. "That stone was painted with her family symbol. That's a proposal for a future proposal." Aztec courtship was slow, methodical, and often wrapped in layers of metaphor. Poems were a favored method, verses exchanged like spells. Some were innocent. "You are the blossom beneath my breath, the hush before rain." Others were suggestive. "Your voice stirs the fire in my maze, and I do not want to sleep tonight." There were public rules, too. Touching hands in daylight was considered forward unless permitted by a family elder. Sharing food in private? Intimate. Sharing pulque under a moonless sky? Scandalous. Of course, people still did it. That's where the flower walks came in. Long, ritualized strolls through temple gardens where two people could be seen but not overheard. Conversation was whispered. Glances were traded like currency. A priestess would supervise from afar, usually while pretending to inspect a pomegranate tree. These walks were sacred, sanctioned, and filled with more tension than a basket of overripe tomatoes. Here's your fringe detail, the famed flower whispers. During certain festivals, women would pluck petals from sacred blooms and whisper wishes into them. Then they'd offer the petal to a chosen man, sometimes discreetly, sometimes not. If he accepted it, it was a symbolic yes. If he tucked it behind his ear, that meant he was dreaming about her too. You're handed a petal by a young girl selling amulets. She grins. For courage, she says, or foolishness, depends on how you use it. You tuck it behind your ear. Later, you pass a mural showing a jaguar and a hummingbird circling each other. Melina explains the jaguar is power, the hummingbird is desire. Together, dangerous. You begin to understand why courtship in Tenochtitlán wasn't just about love. It was strategy, resistance, a coded rebellion against structure. When you can't choose your path, choosing your heart, even quietly, is an act of power. As the sun dips behind the temple towers, you watch a final scene. A girl drops a fan near a boy's feet. He picks it up, hands it back, then hesitates, and opens it. Inside is a single quetzal feather. They look at each other for a breath too long. Then they turn away. Not yet, but maybe. You're standing in a narrow stone corridor, half lit by guttering torchlight and heavy with incense. The air tastes like smoke and secrets. Melina's tone shifts as she leads you through a series of steep, echoing steps toward a place she calls the Room of Shadows. And today, you're not visiting temples or flower festivals. You're going to hear what no one dares speak loudly. The stories of the temple boys. The Aztecs were deeply structured people. Everything had its place. Stars, maize, gods, emotions, even desire, especially desire. And where it didn't fit, it was hidden, or repurposed, or renamed. You reach a small, square chamber tucked behind a wall of carved stone serpents. This isn't part of the grand tourist trail of the Templo Mayor. This is where whispers gather. On the walls, barely visible in flickering light, are carvings that don't appear on any state-sponsored murals. Figures dancing in close proximity. Twin moons carved beside two men in mirrored positions. One holds a flower, the other a dagger. Interpret as you wish. This, Melina says quietly, is where the boys learn to serve the gods and how to forget themselves. She tells you about the Kalmakak and the Telpak Kali, the schools where boys were trained, one for nobles, the other for commoners. In both, religious instruction was intense. Daily routines included fasting, incense burning, reciting prayers, and enduring physical hardship. But some boys were chosen for a different path: service to the temples, specifically to assist priests during rituals involving the gods of fertility, love, or duality. Some were chosen for beauty, others for their singing voice, their skill with flowers, their capacity for silence. Once chosen, they were often elevated, given better food, finer clothes, the softest sleeping mats, but nothing was given freely. These boys were expected to serve without question, to be present in ceremonies where their presence blurred the line between sacred vessel and object. You sit on a woven mat while Melina lights a small pot of copal. There are stories, she begins, about a boy named Tenochtitlán. His name meant rabbit, and he was said to have the voice of a reed flute in springtime. Tenochtitlán was chosen to serve in the temple of Xochipilli, the god of art, song, games, and unspoken pleasures. Tenochtitlán performed in rituals. He danced, he offered incense, he played the flute, he was praised, admired. And one day, he disappeared. Some say he ran away. Others whisper he was sacrificed, offered in a ceremony that scholars now debate intensely. Was it symbolic? Did he choose it? Was he simply no longer useful once his beauty faded? Michel Foucault might call this the architecture of power, where the body becomes a space for enforcement, a site where rules are both written and broken. Historians still argue whether the service of these temple boys involved acts we'd now consider exploitative. Some insist it was all symbolic. Others find the euphemisms too carefully constructed. Spanish friars who arrived after the conquest recorded vague, scandalized tales of boys touched by holiness and priests with too many favorites. The truth may be tangled somewhere between missionary outrage and pre-Hispanic silence. You trace a finger over the carving of a twin flower design, a common Aztec symbol for duality, two stems growing in opposite directions, joined by a single root. It's often associated with gods who embody both male and female traits. This is no accident. Melina explains that the Aztecs recognized complex gender roles through certain deities. Xochipilli, the flower prince, was sometimes portrayed with a male consort, or even embodying both masculine and feminine energies. Another god, Ometeotl, literally two lord, represented the fusion of opposites: male-female, light-dark, order-chaos. The boys who served these gods sometimes took on roles that defied conventional masculinity. They wore soft robes, painted their faces, and adorned themselves with bells. Some scholars suggest they were early spiritual forerunners of gender nonconforming roles. Others argue they were simply trained in ritual flexibility. One fringe detail Melina shares involves the use of perfume. Boys selected for these rites were sometimes prepared with fragrant oils, crushed marigold, anise seed, and the sap of a certain sacred tree. It was said that their scent had to be perfect, not too sweet, not too earthy, just enough to signal the divine without provoking temptation. You pause. Wait, you say. Temptation by whom? Melina only smiles. Let's just say the gods weren't the only ones watching. There's a story etched in paint behind one of the stone alcoves, so faint you only notice it when the torch flickers just right. It shows a youth holding a flower in one hand and a blade in the other. Above him, a priest kneels. But who holds power in this scene is unclear. Some see it as obedience, others rebellion. It's easy to romanticize the past, but in moments like these, the hush of the temple doesn't feel noble. It feels heavy, like too many truths buried beneath incense ash and ritual silence. As you leave the chamber, Melina gives you a bundle of dried flower petals. For remembering, she says. Some stories never get spoken out loud, but they deserve to be carried. You walk slowly back into daylight. The sun feels a little too bright. Somewhere nearby, boys laugh as they practice their war cries. Their voices ring sharp and young. You wonder which of them might be chosen, or already have been. That night you dream of a boy dancing alone beneath a flower-covered arch. No audience, no God watching, just him, moving freely for the first time. Tonight, the moon hangs low and swollen over the lake, casting silver threads across the rippling water. You're back at the temple district again, barefoot now, your footsteps soft against the cool volcanic stone. Melina walks beside you without saying much. She's quieter tonight. You can tell something is different. She finally speaks when you reach the steps of a smaller pyramid, unpainted, weathered by rain and time. Tonight, she says, you're going to learn what it meant to give your body as a gift. You don't know whether to be honored or horrified. You're led to a terrace with a wide view of the city. Tenochtitlán sparkles below like a slow-moving constellation, the torchlight flickering on the canal waters. In the center of the platform stands an altar, not tall or imposing, just waist-height, flat, polished, stained with time. Around it are small clay bowls filled with flower petals, cacao, obsidian dust, and something that smells faintly metallic. You sit cross-legged beside the altar, and Melina begins to explain what this place was for. The final act of devotion, a form of giving that had no undoing. The ritual of self-offering, often called tlaxocamati, a word that can mean both thank you and I am yours. At first it sounds like a death rite, but as Melina gently unfolds the layers, you realize it was also, strangely, solemnly, a ritual of intimacy, of desire, not carnal, not flirtatious, but rooted in something deeper, the belief that your body, your blood, your breath could mean something beyond survival. You've heard of human sacrifice in the Aztec world, of course, but rarely do we talk about it from this angle, from the perspective of those who volunteered. And yes, many did. There's a story passed down through temple chants of a man named Itzcopili, a dancer, a poet, a man known not for battle prowess or political skill, but for how he moved like rainwater in a dry season. He was chosen to become the avatar of Tenochtitlan, the smoking mirror god, a deity of night, destiny, and unpredictable passion. For a full year, Itzcopili lived as the god. He was bathed in flower oil each morning, taught sacred verses, dressed in embroidered robes, kissed by strangers who whispered prayers against his skin. Children brought him toys, women brought him songs, men brought him masks to bless. And on the final night, after a banquet where he sang his own farewell poem, he climbed these very stairs. He laid himself upon the stone. Here's where the myths tangle with reality. Some say his heart was removed in a moment of ecstasy, his final breath a chant of joy. Others say he wept, not from fear, but from fulfillment. That to be seen, celebrated, and offered back to the cosmos was the most beautiful end he could imagine. Historians still argue whether such sacrifices were truly voluntary. Were they chosen by fate, coerced by tradition, compelled by belief? Did they want it, or simply need to believe they were part of something larger? Peter Webb writes that in some ancient societies, the line between eros and devotion was blurred to the point of transparency. In Aztec ritual, this becomes physical, the act of surrender, of vulnerability, of being held down not in violence, but reverence. You ask Melina, was it painful? She hesitates. It wasn't supposed to be, not at first. The idea was, the spirit leaves before the knife touches. The gods kiss you out of your skin, that's what they said. You're silent for a while. Then she picks up a bowl and holds it to your nose. Inside, flower petals soaked in honey and fermented sap. She dips a finger, touches it to your forehead, then to your heart. This is what they wore, she says, before they lay down. There's something intimate about the touch. Not romantic, not dramatic, but gentle. A permission, a recognition. You sit back and look at the obsidian blades laid out near the altar. They're polished to a black so deep it reflects nothing, just absorbs the torchlight until they seem to vanish into shadow. She tells you one more story before you go. A girl named Chalchi, born on the moon's third face, raised in the temple of Xochiquetzal. She was chosen not for beauty, but for silence. Never cried as a baby, never laughed too loudly. She was made a flower maiden, trained to serve during festivals. But when a flood swept through the city and half the harvest failed, the priest declared a special ceremony was needed. A maiden had to step forward. No one moved, until she did. They say she walked to the altar barefoot, wearing nothing but garlands. They say she sang a song no one could remember the next day. They say the wind stopped blowing when she closed her eyes. And they say the rains came the very next morning. No statue was built for her, no song recorded. But her name appears in temple records, once written in red ink beside the phrase, "She opened the path." You sit there a while longer, watching the moon drift across the lake's reflection. You think about breath, about the way something simple, air, skin, pulse, can carry weight in the right hands. You ask Melina, do they still do it? She shakes her head. Not like that, but people still give themselves away all the time. Then she smiles. Sometimes they even survive it. You awaken to music, Soft, rhythmic, and oddly joyful. Not the drumming of priests or the slow chanting of prayers, but something lighter. Flutes, rattles, and the occasional bark of a dog running through it all like it's part of the percussion. Today is different. Today is Xochiautl, the day of flower battles. Melina meets you wearing a garland of bright orange blossoms and a sash embroidered with frogs. It's the day when everything's a metaphor, she says, even the metaphors. The air is electric. Market stalls are draped in woven paper, flower petals cover the streets, and everywhere you look, people are dancing, painting, teasing. It's not a war, but it feels like one, except the weapons are petals, poetry, and innuendo. The Day of Flower Battles was one of the Aztecs' most anticipated festivals, especially for the young and romantically hopeful. The idea was simple: ritualized mischief. Boys and girls, technically unmarried, but let's not pretend the rules were always followed, would engage in games designed to simulate the struggles of courtship, conquest, and surrender. You join a group gathered beneath a canopy of woven maize husks. In front of you, a young man stands atop a platform made of reeds. He's painted head to toe in white and wears a crown of pink dahlias. Across from him is a girl with a painted sun on her cheek and a bundle of marigolds in one hand. They face each other, silent, until the girl suddenly tosses a flower directly at his chest. He doesn't flinch. Instead, he begins to sing. The song is improvised, playful, and vaguely scandalous. Something about her being the root that turns his maize blue. She counters with a verse about his stalk being bent by the morning rain. The crowd gasps and cheers. That was a bold one. And this is just the start. Over the next hour, you witness dozens of these battles. Some are comic. Two friends arguing over who baked better tamales. Others are sweet, verses about lost love written on flower petals and tucked into each other's hair. And then there are the subtle ones. Long glances, half smiles, a dance done just a bit too close. Melina explains that this day wasn't just play, it was release. For a culture that kept desire under tight lock and key, controlled by priests, calendars, and the ever-watchful gods, flower battles gave people a chance to pretend to misbehave. And in pretending, sometimes they just went ahead and did it. You wander through a side garden where a quieter version of the celebration unfolds. Here, couples sit on low benches beneath trees, whispering into flower buds, then tucking those flowers into each other's belts. It's symbolic, yes, but also deeply intimate. These flowers are not thrown, they're offered. There's a story Melina shares, one that doesn't appear in any codex but is told every year. A young warrior named Axayacatl returned from his first campaign and fell for a girl who sold baskets near the temple steps. He had no titles, she had no dowry. So, on the day of flower battles, he challenged her to a poetic duel. He lost, spectacularly. But her last verse ended with, "If your blade is dull, let your heart be sharp." They were married within the month. It's said she wrote all his war speeches after that. Historians still argue over whether flower battles were entirely metaphorical. Some accounts suggest that by nightfall, actual relationships were formed or dissolved, depending on the outcome of these games. Others claim the whole thing was chaste performance art, closely monitored by elders. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. And then comes the procession. Dozens of young people parade through the city wearing elaborate costumes. Jaguars, birds, maize spirits, the occasional floating frog. Each carries a single flower wrapped in cloth and tied with a colored thread. They pause at corners, recite verses aloud, then leave the flowers behind like breadcrumbs. If someone finds the flower and understands the riddle, they're allowed to visit the giver after dark, to share a poem, or more. One fringe tradition Melina points out is the shoulder tap. If a person tapped your shoulder with a flower and you laughed, you were expected to recite a comeback verse on the spot. If you couldn't think of one, you had to offer a dance, or a kiss, or a promise of a poem the next day, a gentle game of playful surrender. You're tapped twice before sunset. You manage a decent verse once. The other time, you owe someone a mango. As the sun begins to dip, the flower fights wind down, but the laughter doesn't. You sit beside a reflecting pool where girls float marigold blossoms in the water, each bearing a name written in charcoal. When the flower drifts toward another, a match. When it sinks, bad luck. Maybe try again next year. You ask Melina what happens after dark. She raises an eyebrow. Officially, the festival ends. Unofficially, she hands you a candle shaped like a moon and walks away without another word. Later that night, as you lie on your woven mat, you notice a flower tucked into your belt. It wasn't there before. There's no note, just a single red thread tied around the stem. Maybe it's a mistake, maybe not. But as you drift to sleep, you find yourself whispering into the petals, just in case. By morning, the petals from yesterday's flower battles have already begun to wilt. The streets that were once carpeted in marigold and poetry now crunch softly underfoot as you walk beside Melina through a quieter district of the city. Today is a day of reckoning, not the dramatic kind with lightning and drums, but the slow, awkward reckoning that follows when passion spills out into public view. You're going to witness something that the Aztecs took almost as seriously as sacrifice, a tribunal of public intimacy. Justice in this city, Melina explains, was equal parts law, ceremony, and performance. If you were caught loving without permission, there was always a price. Sometimes it was shame. Sometimes it was poetry. You reach a low building with thick stone walls and no decoration, an austere rectangle that seems to absorb the sound around it. This is the Tenochtitlán, or noble court. But today, it's not nobles being judged. It's a pair of lovers. And they've made a very public mistake. You're ushered inside quietly, blending into a crowd that includes temple scribes, family elders, and several stern-looking women holding baskets of dried beans, likely meant for throwing, not eating. At the front sit 3 judges in finely woven cloaks. Behind them, 2 people stand side by side, a young woman with her head bowed, and a man who looks like he's trying very hard not to blink too often. They were caught during last week's Tenochtitlán festival, hiding behind a maize altar. Hands were seen where hands should not have been. Worse, they were not betrothed, not even approved for courtship by a family intermediary. In a society where every stage of love was scripted, they skipped pages. That rarely ends well. The hearing begins not with accusations, but with a formal recitation of seasonal codes. You learn quickly that timing is everything in Aztec law. What might be mildly inappropriate in the month of rain gods could be a full offense during the maize flowering cycle. They picked the wrong month for mischief. The first testimony comes from an elder priestess who delivers a 5-minute metaphor involving snakes, pumpkins, and the inappropriateness of spontaneous joy. It's both poetic and slightly terrifying. Then comes a poem, written by a neighbor, lamenting the moral decay of today's youth and the tragedy of her laundry being hung too close to the scene of the crime. Melina leans over and whispers, "That woman has reported 3 couples this year. She collects poems the way others collect feathers." The accused are given a chance to speak. The young woman offers a confession, not of shame, but of confusion. "My heart moved before my feet," she says. "I followed it." The man, less eloquent, simply says, "I thought the altar was unguarded." Q gasps. Then comes the sentencing, but it's not what you expect. Instead of exile or punishment, the judges declare a public exchange of learning. This is one of the more creative Aztec penalties. The lovers must write 3 verses each about what they've learned and recite them aloud at the next market festival. They are also assigned to different community work details under the supervision of the most humorless man you've ever seen holding a broom. There's also a fine, 2 cloaks and a pair of sandals. To restore balance, the judge says, and because flowers are not free. Historians often overlook these moments in favor of grand sacrifices and imperial campaigns, but this slow, theatrical unraveling of an ordinary transgression was just as much a part of daily Aztec life. Foucault would likely see it as the state policing the body, not through brute force, but through symbolic narrative. You sinned, you must tell a better story to atone. Peter Webb's writings touch briefly on these ritual tribunals, noting how they blurred the line between law, theater, and therapy. Justice wasn't just handed down. It was performed, and the community was expected to bear witness. Melina tells you another story, more tragic. A young man named Quali and his lover, Olin, were caught exchanging painted stones beneath the temple of the rain god. They were from rival clans. Not only was their love forbidden, it was politically inconvenient. The tribunal ruled against them. Olin was sent to a convent of flower maidens. Quali was reassigned to work detail along the lake, where he wrote messages into boats made of woven reeds. Fishermen would find them and read them aloud to the winds. One line remains: "My name no longer matters, but I am still blooming." Sometimes, Melina says, punishments weren't cruel, they were just lonely. You leave the tribunal as the couple exits through a side door, their faces unreadable. The woman touches her belt, where a single marigold petal still clings. The city resumes around you. Drums in the distance, the smell of roasted maize. Life doesn't pause for anyone's heartbreak. You pass a wall where past punishments have been painted in soft colors, not as warnings, but as reminders. Two lovers under a tree, a basket of feathers spilled on the ground, a sandal missing its pair. You ask Melina if people ever refuse the sentence. "Oh, once or twice," she says, "but then the gods get involved, and they're very big on paperwork." That night, you sit by the canal and think about the tribunal, about the balance between love and law, about how something as simple as a kiss can echo through stone corridors for generations. And as the wind rustles the reeds, you wonder, if you had to write 3 verses to explain yourself, what would they be? The sun is climbing now, its golden light warming the adobe walls and casting long shadows from the pyramid steps. Today, you're not visiting temples or courts. You're studying calendars and how the Aztecs somehow managed to organize everything, including sex, by the stars. You follow Melina through a quiet library tucked beside a garden of prickly pears and slow-blooming lilies. Inside, the walls are lined with amaxtli, folded screen books painted on bark paper or deerskin, filled with glyphs, dots, and astonishingly vivid scenes of gods doing things that definitely wouldn't get past modern film censors. She unrolls a codex on a stone table. "This," she says, "is where time tells you when you're allowed to want." You blink. "Time? Tells you?" "Oh yes," she nods. "Wanting isn't a free-for-all. There's a calendar for that." The Aztecs used 2 major calendars, the 260-day sacred calendar and the 365-day solar calendar, Huali. These weren't just tools for tracking seasons or harvests. They determined everything: when you could marry, when to abstain, when certain gods encouraged union, and when they preferred you to just meditate. Melina explains that each month had its own deity focus. Some months were devoted to war, others to rain, others to maize fertility. But 4 months out of the year were associated with themes of pleasure, intimacy, and what she gently calls the opening of flowers. One such month was Etzalcoatlistli, the season of food and water blessings, when couples were encouraged to renew their connection through acts of joyful moisture. That's not a euphemism. Okay, it is. But it's an ancient, seasonal euphemism. You see a glyph showing 2 people beneath a waterfall, holding maize stalks and facing each other. Below that, a flowering plant with 2 buds. You don't need to be a scholar to decode that one. Another month, Tlaxochimaco, was associated with offerings of flowers to the gods and by extension to one another. People gave garlands to prospective lovers, each flower a coded message. Red blooms for longing, yellow for patience, white for please don't tell your uncle. But the most curious of all is Teotleco, the month when the gods were believed to return from their journeys and walk among mortals. During this time, certain temples performed what were essentially welcome back rituals, symbolic weddings between humans and gods. It was understood that you might feel extra yearny during Teotleco. After all, the divine was watching, and some people liked being watched. Melina pulls out a ritual scroll depicting a ceremony during Teotleco. A man is shown lying on a woven mat, painted blue from head to toe, surrounded by 7 priestesses dressed as stars. This one, she says, is said to represent the night sky receiving the sun. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. It was very metaphorical, but also quite literal. Historians still argue about the exact function of these ceremonies. Some say they were symbolic only, filled with dance, gesture, and suggestion. Others point to temple records listing which couples reconsecrated their union that month, suggesting some level of formalized intimacy. Foucault might suggest it was a way to ritualize desire, to permit it, regulate it, and give it narrative meaning. And there's the curious case of the 13-day periods governed by specific deities within the Tonopawali. One such cycle, ruled by the goddess Tlazolteotl, was believed to cleanse impure thoughts after first indulging them. Priests would advise fasting beforehand, then permit controlled expression. Melina calls it licensed sinning. One fringe detail that scholars rarely mention involves moon phases. In rural villages, elders would advise couples to only conceive under waxing moons during the month of Oshpanisli, the season of sweeping and purification. Children born from that timing were believed to inherit better balance between passion and wisdom. Of course, not everyone followed the rules. You read about a man named Tetsahuac, a farmer who fell in love with a musician during the month of mourning, when all expressions of joy were to be restrained. They were discovered dancing beneath a tree, and the local priest declared it a calendar breach. Their punishment? Public gardening for a year. They made a beautiful field, Melina says. Still grows tulips every spring. Calendars didn't just say when to do things, they told you how to feel. Even dream interpretation changed with the days. Dreaming of water during Atlaqualo meant abundance. Dreaming of a kiss during Panquetzalisli? Scandal. Dreaming of your neighbor's husband during Huetozosli? Bad maize for 3 seasons. You pass a mural showing a pair of lovers in a canoe drifting beneath stars. Above them, the moon glows. Below them, fish leap from the water. Melina explains, this was the night of reeds, when lovers were allowed to sleep in boats under the open sky. No questions asked. And here's where the calendar gets even more tangled. Certain tonali, or day signs, were considered better or worse for different types of unions. Born under the sign of Ozomatli, the monkey, you were playful, impulsive, likely to flirt during rainstorms. Born under Acatl, the reed, reserved, poetic, probably better suited to slow dances and moonlit walks. Aztec astrologers would read your entire romantic fate like a woven poem of stars, flowers, and animal signs. No pressure. Before you leave the library, Melina gives you a small codex fragment showing a rabbit, a flower, and 2 hands touching. Your sign, she says, you're a night blossom, the kind that blooms only when no one's looking. That evening, as the sky turns violet, you sit with your scroll and wonder, if time can tell you when to feel, can it also teach you why? You dream of canoes and stars and wake knowing what day it is. The night sky stretches above you like a giant woven blanket, dark and soft and filled with the quiet shimmer of stars. You're sitting on the rooftop of an old herbalist's home, just far enough from the heart of Tenochtitlán that you can see the stars clearly without the glare of temple fires. There's a breeze tonight, carrying the scent of wet stone, night-blooming flowers, and faint traces of roasted maize from someone's dinner pot still simmering below. Melina sits beside you, her legs tucked beneath her, a steaming bowl of some mystery tea balanced in her lap. You ready to hear a love story that broke the sky? She says without looking at you. You raise an eyebrow. She nods toward the stars. There, she says, pointing to 2 bright points near the eastern edge of the night. Sitlomina and Tlahuizcalpantecutli, the girl who dreamed too much, and the boy who became the morning star. And just like that, you're swept into one of the most quietly tragic and beloved love stories in Aztec mythology. A story so softly told, it's mostly whispered by midwives and old poets who hum verses in their sleep. Sitlaumina was a dream reader, a midwife, and a stargazer, a woman said to be born under the sign of the silent moon. She had the gift of knowing what people needed before they spoke. Her dreams could predict illness, change in weather, and allegedly, how many tamales someone was going to accidentally eat at a wedding. Tlahuizcalpantecutli, try saying that after a few bowls of pulque, was the god of the morning star, bright, intense, and a bit too fond of showing up before anyone had time to prepare their hair. He was a celestial being tied to the cycles of renewal, war, and mischief. A god who appeared just before sunrise and vanished just as quickly. Unreachable, uncatchable. But one night, according to legend, he saw Sitlaumina dreaming beneath a jacaranda tree, and something in her stillness called to him. So he came down, not as a blazing light, but as a firefly, small, flickering, and entirely too pleased with himself. She caught him in a gourd, and that, according to the old women who sell medicinal mushrooms at the lake market, is how it began. For 13 nights, he visited her. They spoke of everything: time, fate, heartbreak, and what it feels like to love someone whose name is technically illegal to pronounce after sunset. She told him about her dreams. He told her about the loneliness of stars. Each night, she brought a bowl of warm cacao and 2 obsidian spoons. They drank, talked, sometimes just sat in silence. He told her stories that smelled like lightning. She taught him lullabies that made the gods jealous. And then, of course, they were caught. Because no matter how quiet the heart beats, someone is always listening. The gods convened, and as gods tend to do, they overreacted. They declared that Sitlalmina and Tlahuizcalpancutli's love was disrupting celestial flow, whatever that means. Rain fell on the wrong days. Warriors dreamed of flowers instead of battle. A chicken learned to sing in three-part harmony. Total chaos. So they did what gods do. They turned punishment into poetry. Sitlalmina was made into a star, the one you see just above the southern horizon. And Tlahuizcalpancutli, already bound to his celestial duties, was fixed to the east as the morning star. Each rises and sets just out of reach of the other. Always visible, never together. It said they still speak in flashes of light, brief reflections on water, the sound of wind brushing against sleeping cheeks. Melina turns her head and watches you quietly. We tell these stories, she says, not just to remember, but to explain why it still aches, why the sky still pulls. This isn't the only celestial love story the Aztecs whispered beneath their blankets. There's the tale of Osaloyohuali, the jaguar spirit girl who fell in love with a flute player. He lived in the shadow of a mountain and played music so beautiful that even the gods paused to listen. They met only at dusk in a garden of obsidian flowers where they weren't supposed to touch. But they did. One night, she didn't come. Instead, he found a single obsidian bloom left in her place, with the imprint of her paw pressed into the petal. He buried it. The next day, the wind changed, and every obsidian flower in the city bloomed for the first and only time. Now, people say when you dream of black petals, someone is remembering you too hard. Historians still argue over whether these myths were symbolic tales, spiritual metaphors, or just very elaborate bedtime stories invented by lonely astronomers. Michel Foucault might see them as coded languages for forbidden connection, a way to map longing across generations, passed down in constellations and lullabies. One fringe detail Melina shares is about a particular star cluster the Aztecs called the drifting basket. According to obscure tradition, if two people spotted it at the same time while bathing at night, they would find each other in their dreams, even if separated by oceans or death. It's a very rare star, she says, very disobedient, like love. You lie back on the roof, eyes drifting between stars, trying to see patterns in the darkness. She hands you a bundle of herbs, wrapped in palm leaf, tied with red string. Sleep with this under your mat, she says. If you dream of water, you're still searching. If you dream of fire, well, you already know. Later, as you drift towards sleep, you hear the healer humming softly, an old tune meant to keep dreams gentle. The stars overhead shimmer like winks from distant friends, and in your dream, there's a figure waiting in a field of black flowers. They don't speak, they just hold out a bowl of cacao. You reach for it, knowing that it will disappear with the sunrise. But still, you take the sip, because some love stories were never meant to end. They were only meant to echo. Quietly, forever, you wake to the sound of sweeping. A soft, rhythmic motion, the kind that makes you feel like time is being tidied up before your eyes even open. Outside, a group of priestesses dressed in pale robes are sweeping the temple courtyard with bundles of stiff grass tied with red string. The air smells faintly of copal and marigold ash. A wind carries it into your lungs like a reminder. Today is not like the others. Today, Melina says as she places a warm tamale in your hand, we meet the gods that don't fit into either box. You blink. What boxes? She raises an eyebrow. Male, female, day, night, yours, mine. The gods who walk the lines between. You follow her through the winding side paths of Tenochtitlán until you arrive at a shrine not listed on any tourist-friendly codex. It's small, humble, and utterly unassuming, except for the garland of yellow and black feathers tied in a perfect knot at the door. Melina touches it once, bows her head, and steps inside. This is the house of Ometiotl, the god who is both and neither, parent of all, two in one, the god of opposites held in balance, and perhaps the best place to begin understanding the Aztecs' complicated relationship with gender and identity. In most official records, Aztec society appears rigid, structured hierarchically, guided by specific roles for men and women. Men were warriors, scribes, priests. Women were midwives, weavers, traders. But in the spaces between temple walls and market stalls, you begin to see the truth is far messier and far more interesting. In Ometeotl's shrine, you see painted murals of figures with dual faces, half painted in warrior red, the other in moon silver, dancers with both breasts and beards, a priest in a jaguar pelt weaving cloth beside a woman holding a spear, and at the center, a statue, small, smooth, and strangely peaceful. Neither male nor female, both, neither. One hand holds a maize stalk, the other, a mirror. Melina tells you that in certain seasons, ceremonies were held here where participants, regardless of birth role, dressed as their opposite, not in mockery, but in reverence. A reminder that identity is not fixed, that the gods made humans from both clay and contradiction. You'd be surprised, she adds, how many warriors could embroider, or how many priestesses knew how to throw a spear better than their brothers. One such ceremony, known as Tlahuili Matoshiani, was held during the Moon of Transitions. Participants would don clothing of the other, then perform a dance in front of Ometeotl's altar. The dance began in awkward mimicry, but gradually dissolved into fluid movement where bodies simply were, not performed, not labeled, just present. Historians still argue over whether these rituals were subversive or simply sacred expressions of wholeness. Michel Foucault would likely have applauded the way the Aztecs ritualized nonconformity, made it not just visible, but holy. Peter Webb once noted that cultures often encode their deepest truths in their strangest festivals, and here the truth was simple. Duality is divine. Melina shares a story whispered through generations of a high priest named Xochitl, who after dreaming of a rain serpent with two tongues, awoke and began dressing in both male and female garments. At first, people laughed. Then they stopped laughing. Xochitl's prayers began to yield rain and drought, sun and storm. Crops flourished, children slept soundly, and at the end of their life they were buried with two mirrors, one polished, one shattered. To see both, the note read. You sit quietly in the shrine for a long while. The stone beneath you is cool. The light shifts softly through slats in the wall, painting stripes of gold and shadow across your hands. A younger priest enters, dressed in a robe dyed with cochineal and moonlight ash. They offer you a small bundle wrapped in blue cloth. Inside is a jade bead carved into a spiral. It's a reminder, they say. Not everything must be either or. Outside the shrine, the city hums with activity. Markets, songs, arguments, tamales. But you feel as if you've stepped through a doorway into something softer, something that makes room. One fringe practice Melina tells you about was called the cloak test. In some temple schools, students were given blank cloaks and asked to decorate them however they wished, choosing symbols, threads, designs. Some chose traditional markers of their assigned role. Others blended them or ignored them entirely. The cloaks were worn at the year's final ritual, where no questions were asked, no comments made, just acknowledgement. You're shown one such cloak in a side room, a mix of storm clouds, flower buds, and dancing jaguars. A label beneath reads, found, kept, loved. That night, back in your room, you trace your fingers along the spiral of your jade bead. You think about names, labels, the slow, steady weight of expectation, and the strange relief of simply being. You dream of a mirror floating on a lake, one side reflecting your face, the other something else, familiar and smiling. You don't need to name it, you just let it stay. It's late afternoon, and the sun filters down in golden slats through the palm frond roof of a small ceremonial house. You're in the quiet corner of a sacred compound now, surrounded by jars of herbs, baskets of dried flowers, and shelves filled with wooden combs, copper tweezers, and something that suspiciously resembles lipstick. Melina claps her hands and says with a grin, "Time to get ready." You blink. Ready for what? For beauty, she replies, matter of fact. Tonight's union ceremony requires full aesthetic coordination. There will be flower oils, there will be perfumes, there may even be painted nipples. We don't skimp. You glance around at the priestesses bustling like theater makeup artists on opening night. And suddenly you realize this is not a joke. The Aztecs didn't treat beauty as a trivial pursuit. In sacred rituals, especially those involving symbolic union, fertility, or divine embodiment, every surface mattered. Skin, hair, breath, scent. Every detail was a prayer, or at the very least, a polite invitation to the gods. One woman guides you to a stool and begins to brush your hair with slow, rhythmic strokes. The comb is bone-carved, the bristles infused with crushed chamomile. She hums a song that sounds like wind through reeds. You feel your scalp tingle in the most pleasant way. Meanwhile, another priestess prepares an ointment made from flower oil, ground seeds, and a tiny bit of gold dust. She rubs it between her palms until it warms, then smooths it across your arms, behind your ears, and the small of your back. It's like being painted with sunlight. Melina, ever helpful, holds up a polished obsidian mirror and says, "You now officially smell better than a rain-kissed mango," which you assume is a compliment. On the far side of the room, a young couple is being prepared for the main ritual tonight. They're not lovers, at least not in the modern sense. They've been chosen as symbolic partners for a seasonal rite, the joining of earth and sky, river and root, dream and waking. They won't touch, not physically, but they will share breath, gaze, scent, and rhythm. You watch as the woman is anointed with a mixture of marigold oil and cacao paste. Her body is wrapped in a robe of fine cotton painted with vines and moons. Her arms shimmer under the torchlight, bronzed and glowing, a visual hymn. The man wears a feathered sash, bare-chested, with white clay markings that trace constellations across his skin. His chest rises and falls slowly as a priestess presses her fingers along his collarbone, whispering something in a dialect older than Nahuatl. The smell in the air is overwhelming. Flowers, honey, copal, cedarwood, and a hint of something warm and animal, perhaps the sacred musk made from crushed vanilla pods and deer fat, once reserved only for temple rituals. Historians often treat these rituals with caution. The Spanish chroniclers, unsurprisingly scandalized, referred to them as pagan indulgences or naked poetry performances. But modern scholarship suggests they were anything but vulgar. They were meticulously choreographed acts of sacred presence. Sensual, yes, but reverent, intended not for arousal, but for communion. One fringe detail, the nipple paint. Melina holds up a tiny pot of red pigment mixed with crushed cochineal. This, she says, was used to decorate the chest, especially during rites of transformation. Not to shock, but to signal readiness, like wearing a flower on the heart. It was believed that the body had spiritual petals, zones of energy that bloomed under ritual touch, the temples of the wrists, the throat, the soles of the feet, and yes, the chest. Decorating these areas signaled openness to divine presence. You're handed a flower garland infused with sacred scent and asked to breathe into it 3 times. Then you pass it to the person beside you, who does the same. This continues in a slow, silent circle. When it returns to you, it smells entirely different, like memory and mystery and sugarcane smoke. Melina teaches you a phrase to repeat under your breath. Nehua nikimita, in Yolotl, in Tletl. I offer you my breath, my heart, my fire. You whisper it once, then again, until it settles somewhere behind your ribs. The ritual begins at twilight. The couple stands in the center of a flower circle. Around them, priestesses move slowly, scattering petals, fanning scented smoke, and singing a lullaby older than most hills. The man and woman do not touch. Instead, they mirror each other's movements. Hands outstretched, knees bent, fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. Their breath rises like steam in the cooling dusk. You begin to understand this is a ritual not of bodies, but of presence, of being fully seen, fully scented, fully acknowledged. At one point, the priestess draws a line of flower oil down the woman's back, then repeats the motion with the man, a symbol of balance, an echo of rivers. You ask Melina what this ritual is called. She says simply, Yohuali Mitosiani, the night of reflection. It's performed 4 times a year, always on the quarter moon, always with a new pair. It's not about romance, or lust, or even love in the human sense. It's about witnessing another person as a whole universe and allowing yourself to be witnessed in return. After the ceremony, participants are given small clay vials of the scented oil used that evening, not to keep, but to bury. A symbolic offering to the earth, to remind the gods that even beauty, even intimacy, is impermanent and sacred because of it. As you leave, a priestess presses one such vial into your hand. You'll know when to plant it, she says. You tuck it carefully into your belt, still tingling from the flower oil and feeling just a little more real, as if someone finally dusted you off and remembered your name. You sleep that night wrapped in the scent of marigold and cacao, and dream of nothing but warmth. The morning begins in silence, not the eerie kind, but the slow, steady hush of a day not quite ready to speak. You find yourself in a modest adobe house, tucked behind a row of clay ovens, where the smell of warm corn, crushed herbs, and smoke clings to every woven mat and earthen bowl. Today you're meeting the midwives. Melina introduces you to the circle as if you're an old friend in need of gentle scolding. This one, she says, wants to understand how babies, herbs, and sex magic all got tangled together in one city. The midwives laugh, low, deep chuckles that suggest they've seen everything and probably know things your bones haven't even considered yet. You sit among them, cross-legged on a blanket, as one of them, her name is Tenochtitlán, which means flower, starts crushing dried mushrooms with a stone grinder. Let's begin, she says, with the after part. The Aztecs, like many ancient cultures, had a surprisingly advanced understanding of fertility, contraception, and postpartum rituals, and much of that knowledge belonged not to priests, not to warriors, not to doctors, but to women. Specifically, the Tenochtitlán, healers, midwives, and caretakers of that mysterious in-between place where bodies become vessels and new life slips into the world. You're handed a small bundle tied with colored string. Inside, a mix of dried flowers, roasted cacao shell, crushed deer antler, and a few greenish leaves that smell faintly of basil and something more electric. Emergency mix, so Cheetle explains. If you've done the act, but the gods weren't consulted first. It's not a joke. Aztec women had access to a range of herbal contraceptives, including infusions made from wild yam root, fermented sap from the Tenochtitlán plant, a cousin of the poinsettia, and the seeds of a little tree called Tlalquequetzal. Some were chewed, others brewed, and a few, brace yourself, were worn internally in small wax-coated pouches. Yes, DIY medicine, temple approved. Historians still argue whether these were purely folk remedies or backed by formal temple training. Some Spanish friars were shocked and possibly impressed by the efficiency of certain plants. Michel Foucault might argue that this was a form of quiet resistance, a space where women retained bodily agency in a society that often assigned them roles like symbolic cornfield. You're shown a codex page with illustrations of midwives assisting births, massaging bellies, and singing to fetuses still in the womb. One scene depicts a woman holding a steaming cup beneath the belly of a laboring mother. To guide the spirit, Melina whispers, and to keep the baby from arriving with bad dreams. There's a second bundle passed to you, this one wrapped in rabbit fur. You open it and find tiny pieces of obsidian carved into crescent moons. Pain takers, says another midwife, pressed into the wrists during labor, like biting the sky. It wasn't all gentle chants and warm drinks, though. There's a darker side to this world, one where complications meant spiritual imbalance. A baby born too early or in a wrong moon could be interpreted as an omen. A woman who couldn't conceive might be sent for purification rituals. A man who avoided intimacy for too long was at risk of being visited by Itzpapalotl, the obsidian-winged goddess of devouring desire. Not exactly the type you invite to dinner. Melina tells you the tale of a young couple who visited the midwives after 10 moons of marriage and no child. The wife was worried. The husband was embarrassed. The midwives listened, nodded, then handed them each a bitter tea and sent them to a hut filled with scented steam and beds of feathers. What happened inside remains unspecified. But the wife was pregnant within 2 weeks, and the husband walked with a noticeable limp for a month. You're handed a piece of fruit, soft, overripe, and dusted with chili. You bite in and feel the spice bloom at the back of your throat. Wakes the blood, Xochitl says with a wink. And now the fringe ritual, Tlazokamati Tonacayot, the giving thanks for flesh. After childbirth, after intimacy, after any moment where the body gave or received something meaningful, the midwives would perform a simple blessing. A line of flower water across the chest, a poem whispered into the navel, a soft song sung while brushing the hair 3 times with a sacred comb. It was about restoration, reclaiming, saying, I did something, I gave something, and now I return to myself. You close your eyes as one of the midwives gently traces a circle of scented oil onto your forehead. She says something in Nahuatl too softly for you to catch, but you feel it land, right behind your ribs. When you open your eyes, you ask, do people still come to you? Xochitl smiles. More than ever. You leave the house of the midwives with herbs in your pocket, a faint sense of power in your step, and a new respect for the women who knew how to fold love, labor, and healing into the same worn cloth. That night, you sleep deeply, and in your dream, a woman with moon-colored hands hands you a steaming cup. You don't ask what's in it, you just drink. There's a damp heaviness in the air tonight, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes the frogs extra vocal. Rain is coming, or maybe it's already here, waiting just above the city, arms crossed, deciding whether to fall. Melina says the gods are moody this time of year. You're walking toward the far end of the temple district, where the air smells of wet earth, burned chile, and something slightly off. Not bad, just suspicious, like someone mixed flower oil with ambition and forgot to stir properly. Careful what you say here, Melina warns, stepping lightly over a puddle. Rain priests are listening. Rain priests. You've heard of them. You've seen them in murals, robed in turquoise, crowned with feathers shaped like storm clouds, shaking rattles made from dried gourds and tiny stones. They're said to bring the rains with song, sacrifice, and sacred smoke. But there's another rumor. A whisper passed between cooks, midwives, and bored canal fishermen with too much time and just enough pulque in their systems. It says that some rain priests didn't just pray for fertility, they provoked it through rituals that, let's say, blurred the line between meteorology and moonlit rendezvous. You're here to find out if any of that is true. The shrine you're taken to is small, almost hidden beneath layers of moss and climbing vines. Inside, the floor is soft with dirt and old petals. The walls are painted with spirals, waves, and pairs of eyes watching from behind clouds. It's equal parts cozy and unnerving. A priest greets you with a smile that's either deeply kind or gently threatening. He offers you a seat in a cup of something warm and thick, made from fermented amaranth and peppered with crushed flower buds. For clarity, he says, and maybe rain. The ceremony begins with music, not drums this time, but flutes and humming. A circle of priests and assistants begin moving in slow, watery patterns, arms rising, hips swaying, feet tracing loops in the dust. It's hypnotic, almost too smooth. You're not sure if this is a weather forecast or a flirtation. Then comes the incense, thick, sweet, heavy with resin. It curls through the shrine like lazy smoke from a sleeping volcano. The priest begins to chant, not words but sounds. Guttural, melodic. At one point, it sounds like sighing. At another, like laughter under breath. And now, the water. A bowl is brought forth. Clay, wide, painted with blue serpents and maize flowers. Inside, rainwater collected at the start of the last moon cycle. It's mixed with flower oil, a few drops of blood from a sacrificed quail, and according to Melina, whispering at your elbow, something no one will confirm but everyone suspects. Participants take turns dipping their fingers into the bowl, then touching it to their foreheads, their chests, and lips. A symbolic offering, a request. Then a priestess steps into the circle. She wears a cloak of wet feathers, nothing else. She dances, not erotically exactly, not sensually in the way a lover dances, but with a power that pulls at the room, like gravity itself has been reshaped. She stomps, she turns, she raises her arms as if commanding the sky to behave. And when she finishes, it starts to rain. A soft patter at first, then steady, then wild applause from the heavens. The crowd in the shrine bows their heads. Some begin to laugh. Others weep. One man faints. Melina leans in, and that's why they're both respected and avoided. Historians still debate what went on in these rituals. Official codices describe offerings, songs, symbolic water blessings. But fringe accounts, particularly from post-conquest friars and gossipy temple cooks, describe private rituals involving sacred union, sexual expression, and even controlled orgiastic rites intended to stimulate the sky. Foucault would probably raise an eyebrow and scribble ritualized eros as ecological intervention. Peter Webb once noted that in several cultures, the erotic wasn't separated from the agricultural. It was part of the harvest cycle. To touch, to merge, to release, was to mirror nature itself. And the Aztecs? They understood that weather didn't just happen, it had to be courted. One fringe story involves a rain priest accused of misusing his ritual privileges. Instead of summoning storms, he allegedly summoned lovers, dozens. When discovered, he claimed the gods had misinterpreted his chants. He was exiled. But oddly enough, that village experienced excellent rainfall for 3 years afterward. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or maybe the gods appreciated his enthusiasm. You ask the lead priest if rain rituals still involve intimacy. He smiles. Only in the old way. You raise an eyebrow. He adds, the way where a single breath shared between people can change the air itself. Outside, the rain falls harder now, cleansing, urgent, alive. People gather in the streets to dance, to laugh, to thank the clouds. Children splash through puddles, lovers kiss under doorways. The city smells like wet earth and flowers. You return to your room, drenched to the bone, skin tingling, hair plastered to your head. Melina tosses you a towel and says, now you've been baptized by gossip and thunder. You're practically local. You dry off, curl up in your mat, and listen to the rain tap its fingers against the world. And in your dream, you're dancing. Not for a crowd, not for a lover, not for the gods, but for the sky itself. And it listens. The city smells different in the aftermath of rain. Fresher, looser, as if the air has finally exhaled and invited you to do the same. Streets shine with puddles reflecting sun-streaked clouds, and the stone walls of temples glisten like someone's just finished scrubbing history clean. Melina hands you a reed flute. We're going to the singing school, she says. You look at her skeptical. To learn a song? She grins. To learn a seduction. Welcome to the House of Song, one of the most respected institutions in Tenochtitlán. It's where young people came to learn not just music and poetry, but the subtle art of communication through rhythm, voice, and performance. It was part music school, part emotional boot camp, and some whisper, part matchmaking service if you sang the right tune on the right moon. Inside, the air hums with energy. Reed flutes lean against the walls like tired dancers. Drums sit in corners, still dusted with pollen from the last festival. And in the center, a group of students sitting cross-legged around a master singer whose voice could probably calm volcanoes if asked nicely. You learn to speak to the gods, Melina says, but also to the heart, and sometimes other things. The songs taught here weren't just about love. They were love. Crafted with the same precision as a priest's chant or a warrior's battle cry, each verse carried layers. Spiritual longing, social expectation, private desire. A single note, placed carefully, could make someone laugh, cry, or leave a market stall blushing. You're handed a sheet of bark paper painted with glyphs and melodic lines. Melina reads one aloud. I bring you feathers from the sky, drink from my hands the morning light, and rest where flowers dream you home. It's not even noon, and you're already halfway to writing someone a confession. One of the senior students performs a flower song, a genre reserved for subtle declarations of interest. She sings without accompaniment, her voice fluttering at the edges like a hummingbird that hasn't decided whether to land. The words are simple. You pass me like rain. I stay dry but thirstier. It's ridiculous and perfect. You learn that every vocal performance had a purpose. Some were for courtship, others for apologies. A few, strictly forbidden outside ceremony, were for sacred union, the musical equivalent of undressing in moonlight. These or songs of desire were rarely taught, but you get to hear one. A master singer, white-haired and barefoot, steps forward and closes his eyes. When he sings, the room tightens. The sound is low, trembling, full of space. No words, just tones rising and falling like breath on the neck. By the end, half the room is crying. The other half is pretending not to. Melina turns to you and whispers, now imagine that sung directly to someone, under a tree, in the middle of flower season. Yeah. Historians still debate how widespread this use of music as erotic ritual was. Some codices describe the Quiquiculi as formal institutions tied to temple duties. Others hint at a less rigid structure, a place where boundaries blurred, especially under moonlight and after performances. Michel Foucault would probably describe the whole institution as a sonic ritual of embodied power, which is a fancy way of saying music meant business. One fringe detail? Some lovers would never speak to each other aloud, only in song. Their relationship existed solely in verses passed through friends or sung from balconies. One recorded pair composed an entire courtship cycle over 7 years, 12 songs, each marking a season. They married only after singing the last one together during a maize blossom festival. Tragically romantic, logistically exhausting. You also hear of the flute duel tradition. When two people were interested in the same potential lover, they would compete not with fists, but with original melodies. Whoever played the more moving tune won the right to offer their garland first. One famous match lasted until dawn, when both players passed out and the intended recipient just walked off with the drummer instead. There were also rules about who could perform what. High-pitched flower songs were usually reserved for women and younger men. Deep-toned water songs belonged to elders or those with political status, but rules bent easily when love was involved. As one old poem goes, "If I sing in the wrong voice, it's because yours replaced mine." Before you leave, the master singer gifts you a tiny flute carved with two birds twined in flight. For the days when words fail, he says. That evening you find yourself by the canal, fingers tracing the shape of your new instrument. The breeze smells of wet stone and sweet smoke. Across the water, a couple sings quietly to each other. You can't hear the words, but you don't need to. Some songs are for understanding, others simply for remembering. And this one, just for you. The final morning arrives like a whisper rather than a proclamation. Soft light seeps through your reed window. The usual clamor of vendors, fishmongers, and arguing parrot sellers seems to hold its breath. Even the dogs are quiet. You stretch slowly on your sleeping mat, limbs warmed by the lingering scent of flower oil and dried herbs. Melina's already waiting outside, perched on a bench like she's been carved from sunlight. She's holding 2 cups of hot atole and a scroll tied with a strand of hair. "You've seen a lot," she says, handing you the scroll, "but you haven't seen this." Today's destination isn't a temple, school, or ritual ground. It's a garden. Not the ornamental kind either, though the Aztecs did invent floating flower islands just to impress each other. This is a private garden, tucked behind a noble's home near the base of the Hill of the Grasshopper. It's overgrown, half-forgotten, and still somehow alive. The garden belonged to a woman named Tenochtitlán. She wasn't a goddess or priestess or even a wife to anyone important. She was a scribe, a quiet one, the kind who drew things that didn't fit in temples, scenes of private moments, unspoken things, rituals that happened far from ceremony. You step into the garden, and it's like stepping into a story with no words, just shape and scent and curve. There are carved stones here, etched not with war scenes or gods, but with intertwined hands, petals opening, eyes closed in trust. Melina shows you a wall paint, weather-worn but still vivid. It shows 2 people sitting face to face, hands resting on each other's knees, surrounded by blooming shop flowers. Above them is a glyph that doesn't translate neatly. It means something between wholeness and undressing without touch. This is what Tenochtitlán documented, the soft rituals, the in-between magic. Her notes, carefully preserved in the scroll you now hold, describe dozens of small rites, none grand enough to make temple records. A lover combing another's hair while whispering the names of birds. 2 elders exchanging of corn silk and woven thread during the new moon. Quiet acts of intimacy. Unrecorded, yet sacred. One passage reads, "I saw them touch each other with their eyes, and the rain came the next day." Another, "When he washed her feet, the maize sprouted taller that season." Historians don't know what to make of Tenochtitlán. Some dismissed her as sentimental. Others now call her the first ethnographer of everyday love. Foucault would likely have adored her, a chronicler of forbidden softness within systems of power. You follow Melina to the farthest corner of the garden, where a circle of stones forms a small altar. No god is named here, no incense offered, just smooth stones warmed by centuries of sun. Here, lovers would come during Tlamanali, the week of sacred forgetfulness, a time when no one asked questions and nothing had to mean more than what it felt like. No contracts, no chance, just a place to be together. Melina tells you this custom has survived unofficially. People still find their way here, she says. Old couples, secret ones, even people who don't know what they're looking for, just that it's quiet and kind. The garden is full of small offerings, tiny tokens left behind. A ribbon, a carved bead, a feather from a hummingbird's wing. You leave your own. A folded petal from the flower placed in your hair days ago. As you sit in the center of the circle, you breathe in the moment. The earth beneath you, the hum of distant voices, the memory of feather cloaks and flower songs and calendars that told people when to ache. You've seen so many faces of desire here, ceremonial, mythical, poetic, medical, chaotic. But this is its still center, a place where it simply is. You rest your hand on the warm stone beside you, and you just breathe. Let your breath begin to slow. Inhale gently, hold it for a count of 3, and release. Imagine your body now, wrapped not in feathers or oils or ritual paints, but in the soft comfort of knowing, of having witnessed something ancient, something deeply human. You've wandered through gardens and temples, but bathed in flower steam, watched the sky speak in stars and stories. You've heard songs written for no one but one person, seen dances that were meant for the rain itself. And now there is nothing more to do. No gods left to greet, no secrets to untangle, just rest. Imagine the last light of Tenochtitlán flickering softly beyond your eyelids. You are lying in a garden of memory, where petals drift in slow motion and even the air feels thick with understanding. You are safe here. Your breath belongs. Let the stories settle in your chest, not as noise but as warmth. Let your bones soften, let the voices fade. Tonight the world can keep spinning, the stars can keep whispering, but you are already home. Good night.